This slideshow is a presentation of topic What are found objects and how are they used in sculpture? An analysis of work by South African artists SEEJARIM, WILLIE, Jane Alexandra and William Kendridge. I will begin with describing what found objects are, then discuss how they are used in sculpture by analyzing various artworks by the above-mentioned artists. Found objects are objects, often those that are utilitarian, manufactured, or natural, that are not originally designed for artistic purposes, but are repurposed in an artistic context by artists. They describe art which is created from such materials, but often modified or presented as they are, and they are referred to as non-traditional. Found objects are used and incorporated by artists in various ways and to provide varied meaning in their sculptural productions. The use of found objects in sculpture can be traced back to Marcel Duchamp when he made a series of what he termed ready-mades, consisting of completely unaltered everyday objects selected by the artist and presented as art. The most well-known example is Fountain, which he exhibited in 1917. The fountain is a standard urinal purchased from a hardware store and displayed on a pedestal resting on its side. Duchamp's use of found objects as ready-mades in the early part of the 20th century challenged the traditional status of art as made from objects uniquely produced or manufactured by the artist. It called into question ideas of art and artist work at the time. The ready-mades challenged conceptions of artist production and artistic labor, in showing that anything which the artist designates as art is art. His ready-mades demonstrated that the authenticity of an artist does not only lie in the trace of the hand of the maker, but it is also linked to the concept of the artist as the genius creator. Even if the artist has not physically manufactured the artwork can still be perceived as art because it is a result of the artist's conceptual labor. This use of ready-mades as artworks was thought of to be an act of de-skilling but also reskilling artists. On one hand, artists no longer had to physically make something to be presented and accepted as an artwork, while on the other hand, because the use of ready-mades emerged as a practice of choosing and creatively assembling found objects, it then developed a new method of art making for artists. This posits that there was a shift from processes such as manipulating materials on a surface to selecting, arranging, and manipulating objects in space, suggesting that the latter is not really unlike the manipulation of paint on a surface. Currently, the use of found object has become widely used and accepted as a practice of art making, and presentation of found objects as valuable artworks. And artists continue to reshape them to create some of the most influential ideas of art history. The next slide discusses sculptures by prominent South African artists that make use of found objects in their sculptures in various ways. These artists are SEEJARIM, WILLIE, Jane Alexandra, and William Kendridge. SEEJARIM is a South African-born female artist who currently lives and works in Johannesburg. SEEJARIM is widely known for her reinterpretation of ordinary and domestic found objects into sculptures. Most of her compositions allude to themes related to time, chance, space, and displacement, a combination of aesthetic transformation, urban concerns, and her own heritage. Some common materials the artist uses in her work are safety pins, wooden pegs, irons, and brooms. Her sculptures appropriate found domestic objects into a sculptural context. She uses a process of repacking, assembling, and attaching these found objects together in a manner that provides a complete and poetic shift in the meaning of this object. In most of her sculpture, in most of her sculptures, no alterations are done to the objects, but alterations are done in the way that the objects are attached together to make the sculptural form or to form meaning. The artist takes seemingly impartial and unemotional objects and fills them with meaning. In an everyday familiar setting, these objects function as utility objects, which are used to brush off dirt, to hang clothes, or securing things in place. But as soon as the artist places them in an artistic context or a gallery setting where they have been repeated, repacked, twisted, and knotted, they become sculptural and they shift our view and understanding of them. This process is linked to the thought that, firstly, the choice of object is in itself a creative act. Secondly, that by cancelling the useful function of an object, it becomes art. And lastly, that the presentation and addition of a title to the object has given it a new meaning and new context. SEEJARIM's exhibition Transgressing Power is one of her exhibitions that displays her most significant use of found objects in the development of her sculptures. Here I review 3 artworks from this exhibition in order to discuss how the artist makes use of found objects. In this exhibition, SEEJARIM thinks differently about daily domestic activities and gives new and creative life to ordinary household found objects as sculptures worthy of conversation and appreciation. In this, the artist retranslates commonplace and domestic characters of household chores into a poetic language. Transgressing power is about the area that is traditionally associated with the role of women, but can be extended to those who engage in daily domestic rituals of sweeping, of washing, and of ironing, giving the objects that are otherwise associated with this ordinary ritual a higher stature. There is a transgression of the use of the material through the sculptures, where household objects are redefined into works of art. The overall practice itself is about transgressing, pushing materials to places where they might otherwise not be imagined, while pushing viewers to interrogate, in particular, their own views and relationships with domestic labor rituals. Throughout the exhibition, the artist is attentive to particularities of each object she chooses, their physical structure, their materiality, histories, and the point to which they can be infused with meaning and suggestion. The repeating of gestures, the slicing of broomsticks to create new forms, the stacking of broom heads all result in a rhythmic relationship between the motions of creating artworks and the everyday gestures of sweeping, cleaning, and hanging. One example is her work, She Sleeps Naked. This is an installation of 10 brooms of different sizes hanging in an upright angle against the white gallery walls. This sculpture references The Witch by American poet Elizabeth Willies, and it also takes its name from a line in that particular poem. This particular sculpture hovers and evokes feelings of levitation that is associated with witchcraft. The artist selected brooms that appear to have already done labor, relating relevantly to her themes. In this installation or sculpture, no process of modification has been made to the brooms. They are taken as they are and displayed in the gallery in a particular manner so that they signify to the narrative and meaning of the themes being explored. Her next artwork is twofold, which is made from pegs and wire. These pegs are manufactured and ordinary. They are identical, but they have been used in a way to diminish all the object's ordinarities and to lift base domesticity into the higher realms of art and abstraction. By looking at the form of the pegs and how they are normally sold and used in multiples, the artist used the original design of the pegs to drive the creative direction of the sculpture. No changes are made to the pegs themselves, but rather the artist attached the pegs together in their multiples using wire to create this particular sculptural form. Her last artwork that I look at is Her Latent Power Lies Dormant. This sculpture is made of grass brooms and wire. This artwork is considered an abstract form that constitutes from most basic and everyday tool of domestic labor, brooms. Nevertheless, in consistency with the themes of this exhibition, the scale, the presence, and the stature exceeds the everyday aspect of the material. The form is solely made from staking a multitude of found broom heads. Overall, the artist's use of found objects need to be read as a new understanding towards sculptural production, towards meaning, towards material, and towards sculpture. Her way of using found objects plays with the idea of the definition of sculpture and sculptural materials. Her use of found objects takes the objects and gives them a new name and a new setting, and allows everyday experiences and connections to inspire the choices of sculptural materials. The conceptual production is the main element that drives the choice of material and classification of the production of the artwork as sculpture. This conceptual production consists solely of reimagining of found objects into creative tools of communication. Therefore, her creative genius lies not in the manufacturing or molding of the objects themselves, but rather on the association of the objects to a particular narrative or theme. SEEJARIM does not alter anything on how the objects are and has no hand in the physical creation, but she alters how the objects are displayed, and her hand is in the conceptual development of the objects as critical and artistic. In this, the artist completely distances the sculptural production away from traditional molding, modeling, carving, or constructing, but simply to the action of collecting, placing, and attaching found objects together. This slideshow is a presentation of topic What are found objects and how are they used in sculpture? An analysis of work by South African artists USHA SEEJARIM, Willie Bester, Jane Alexandra, and William Kendridge. The second artist is Willie Bester. Willie Bester is a South African painter, sculptor, and collage artist. He was born in 1956 in Montagu, a small town close to Cape Town. The artist's works are best known for their role in the protesting of the apartheid system. The themes of his work stem from political issues of that time. In the time of apartheid, the work centered around forced removals and the brutalization of society. Currently, his work focuses more on crime, greed, poverty, and corruption. The artist works in a variety of mediums, including painting, photography, and sculpture, and he is most notable for his mixed media style of art making across mediums using collages, still, and paint. The artist is also known for using recycled steel and other found objects in the creation of his artworks. Much of his subject matter is reflective to the history of apartheid in his townships and also from his own personal accounts. Even though Sotheby once sold one of his sculptures for almost 200,000 rands, the artist is not in South Africa's most well-known artist books. In the creation of his sculpture, the artist collects used objects and transforms the object into sculptural forms. He reimagines them into various sculptural pieces, some completely abstract, while some resembling familiar forms. His sculptures are assembled from scraps and junk, from flea markets, from township and scrapyards, and they can be of anything from shoes, bones, tins, newspaper clippings, metal pieces, combined with the use of oil paints and photographs, even though his main material is steel. The artist's obsession with sourcing the scrap heads and dumping grounds around Cape Town for discarded objects has evolved into recycling the waste of society into powerful and thought-provoking artworks for social injustice, poverty, and political oppression. The artist employs different ways of creating sculpture from found objects. Here I look at two examples of the artist's sculptures where he uses varying ways of creating sculpture. This first artwork is called Poverty Driven, which he made in 2002. The sculpture is made from metal and found objects. In this artwork, Bester collects disparate objects that he brings together to also reference the context from which they are sourced and to which they comment, on top of highlighting particular themes of political issues. The found objects are recycled and reconfigured in a labor-intensive, creative way, and they form reflections of his contemporary society. Still overwhelmed with poverty, inequality, but also hope for the better future, this seemingly functional chair holds the discomfort of a society that is still struggling to reach its goal of democracy. He uses the found objects as materials for the sculpture, metaphorically also relating to the themes he is exploring. As the artist states, how he sees rubbish dumps as symbols of the community in which he lives. While the artist comments on social transformation, he also reclaims found objects, and through the process of transforming them, he rescripts their meaning. This use of found object also highlights the also highlights an important one. On one hand, the application of resources that are considered as junk and recycled has helped reshape the understanding towards art materials. And on the other hand, the processes of reclaiming in these works also focuses on the practical sensibility that recognizes the abundance of discarded materials. This sculpture also makes reference to elements of abstract expressionism and assemblage in sculpture. The second sculpture from Besta that I look at is Trojan Horse 3. This beautifully constructed horse sculpture is made from recycled materials. In this sculpture, the artist takes a completely different direction from poverty-driven of the kind of sculpture that he has created. In poverty-driven, the artist takes a completely abstract route and fuses different and disparate found objects together. In this particular artwork, the artist takes only found metal scraps and constructs them into an immediately familiar form. Unlike SEEJARIM, Besta does not only take found objects and assembles them together, but his process involves sculptural processes of welding and reshaping. The found objects don't work as artworks themselves, but as materials to create the sculptures. Trojan Horse is made from parts of cars and motorcycle scrap metal that the artist transforms into the sculpture. As the title and form suggest, the artwork was made in remembrance of the Trojan Horse massacre that took place on 14 October 1985 in South Africa. The artist's use of found objects speaks to the combining of traditional and non-traditional. The artist uses found objects that are considered non-traditional sculptural materials, but uses processes that are traditionally associated with the medium of sculpture, which are constructing and welding. Jane Alexander is the third artist that I look at. Jane Alexander is one of South Africa's well-known and referenced female visual artists. She has become well known for her figurative sculptures, the Butcher Boys, and eventually for her other figurative sculptures often appearing in table logs. The artist is also known for her commentary of the effects of power and domination over individuals. Alexandra, who was born in 1959 in Johannesburg, South Africa, and growing up in the dens of apartheid, has over her career created sculptures that contain in their quiet and anxiously arranged forms histories of human failures, and Butcher Boys, which formed part of her master's in visual art submission, was her public debut. Alexandra has gone to sculpt a host of figures, each of which are titled and used interchangeably in different size-specific installations. The artist's figures are characterized by their mixture of human and non-human elements and disquieting presence. Alexandra creates her figures first in plaster, then cuts them into fiberglass before completing with oil paint. The artist then incorporates found objects into the sculptures. Even though the artist is not particularly known for her use of found objects, as she is for the casted figures, the artist has incorporated found objects in her sculptures from her debut artwork, The Butcher Boys. Her use of found objects she has used as to edify to the created sculptures in different ways. I reviewed 2 artworks by the artist where she incorporates found objects in different ways. I reviewed Butcher Boys and Bomb Boys. In one example, she incorporates found objects in a way that forms part of the sculpture, and in the other, as accessories for the sculpture. Butcher Boys is one of Alexander's well-known sculptures. The work is a series of 3 hybrid sculptures that are both human and animalistic, sitting on a bench. The artworks are formed as a response from the artist to the dehumanizing effects of apartheid. In creating the sculptures, the primary materials which the artist uses to create the sculpture are associated with traditional sculpture and art materials. This means that the materials are not only manufactured for, but are also manufactured for the use of sculptural art making or sculptural art production, or that the material can easily be associated with the production of sculpture or of art. The sculptures are made with plaster and finished with oil paint. The artist then incorporates bones and horns to finish the sculptures. The bones and horns make reference to the animalistic form of the sculptures. In this artwork, the found objects are not the most highlighted use of material. The found objects rather blend into the overall sculpture made from plaster. The artist uses a mixed media approach where she blends in plaster, which is material that is associated with sculpture. She incorporates oil paints, which are traditionally used within the medium of painting, and also incorporates the found objects that are not associated with any artistic medium. In this, the found objects are used as additional material to the artworks, but not as the primary materials. The second artwork which I review is Bomb Boys from 1998. Bomb Boys is also one of Alexander's well-known artworks. Bomb Boys consists of 9 life-size sculptures depicting young boys. The artworks explore themes of the vulnerability of displaced children. These sculptures have been cast from the same mold. They stand in similar poses, but they are clothed differently with found clothing. Some sculptures are partially clothed and some are fully clothed. And apart from the different masks that are covering the boys' faces, the other element that distinguishes these figures from one another, as they are cast from the same mold, are the different found clothing that Alexander put on the figures. Alexander bought and commissioned the found clothing specially for these sculptures. Incorporating clothing as found objects and clothing the sculptures with these clothes, Alexander uses clothes as accessories for the sculptures. No alterations are done to the clothing. Just like in the Butcher Boys, the found objects are collected and used as they are. In this artwork, the found objects are used more visibly than in the Butcher Boys. The artist uses the clothing, as seen in her other works, as a way of signifying the position of the sculptures or the boys in this particular artwork in society. and also to provide a sense of individuality to each of these 9 sculptures that are similar in form. Clothing is an important signifier of societal position in our daily lives, and using clothing as found objects to accessorize the sculptures provides a familiar sign to societal positions. The artist uses the association of the kind of found clothing that she selected as edifying to the narrative of the artworks. The clothing add to the feeling of pity, of fear, shame, poverty, rebellion, alienation, or sympathy through our familiarity and association to daily lives. The last artist I look at is William Kentridge, also regarded as one of the most influential male South African visual artists. William Kentridge is one of South Africa's most esteemed artists. The artist is multidisciplinary, even though he is mostly well known for his animated charcoal drawings. The artist works in a variety of mediums, including sculpture. He works in printmaking, in tapestry, and stage design, and his works have a long tradition of movement and kinetism. When he engages with three-dimensional form, the artist makes use of varying techniques, materials, and concepts. The artist also makes extensive use of found objects in his sculptures. He appropriates, assembles, modifies, and also incorporates found objects in the production of his sculptures, either as materials to form the sculpture, as part of the sculptures, or as sculptures themselves. Kentridge's sculptures embrace the spontaneous approach, and even though the artist is also not rigid in scale, his sculptures has evolved towards the massive and monumental over the years. In the following slides, I look at 3 sculptures by William Kentridge and how he uses found objects varyingly in these artworks. The first work I look at is Singer Trio from 2018. Singer Trio is a sound and kinetic sculpture. The work consists of 3 classical Singer sewing machines that are orchestrated to play an African folk song through megaphones that are mounted and that are turning. A device is then made from the found sewing machines with the megaphone strapped on top and can be turned from the back to create the sound. In this work, the artist has assembled everyday objects with varying elements and places them together conceptually to form the sculpture. The artwork is made completely from found objects. The found objects are taken as they are. The artist makes no alterations to the objects themselves, but by placing the 2 distinct objects to form one artwork, the objects take on a different meaning. This kind of assembling relies on the use of the subconscious mind to shape meaning through association. This process of the subconscious mind to connect, comprehend, and also appreciate the assemblage of these disparate objects to make meaning can also be aided by some elements that accompany the artwork. Elements such as the ideas of the themes being explored, the title of the artwork, the knowledge of the objects, or the association of objects within their normal spaces, and so forth. this next slide, I don't particularly look at the artworks, but rather the found chairs that are used as pedestals for these artworks. The artworks themselves are not made of found objects. They are molded using familiar sculptural processes, but they are included here because of the use of the chairs as pedestals for the artworks. These artworks are also not always presented on these particular chairs. The artist displays them on different bases with different exhibitions. But his decision to place the artworks on this particular chairs for this particular display extends the conversation of the use of found objects in sculpture. Here, the found objects are used as tools to display the artwork. Because artworks are normally presented on traditional pedestals in galleries, this choice to place the artworks on chairs gives a sense of looseness to exhibiting expectations and normalities. The artist's use of found objects as pedestals extend the conversation beyond art can be anything to pedestals can also be anything. The artist distances the displaying of the sculptures from the traditional bases that provide the aura of high regard by presenting these artworks on these found chairs. These chairs look like they have no particular aesthetic value, but more utilitarian value and outside of the gallery. The artist appropriates here, but instead of appropriating the work itself, the artist appropriates the found object here as pedestals for presenting the artwork. The artist looks at the use of found objects in sculpture not limited to the artworks themselves, but also as able to be extended to the presentation of sculptural artworks. The difference, although, with traditional bases or pedestals that have no other significance than presentation of artworks. Using found objects as pedestals to present the artworks provides a sense of additional function that goes beyond just displaying, but also as edifying to meaning. The activity of selecting chairs instead of tables or any other found object suggests something more meaningful towards the narrative of the artworks. The found objects appear as forming part of the sculpture's visual narrative than just objects to present the artworks. The last artwork that I discuss from William Kendridge is Tabletop Equestrian Sculpture from 2007. This artwork is a sculptural piece where the artist used various found objects that have no apparent connection and assembled them into a recognizable sculptural form. The work is made of branches, foam, steel, box, a book, and wood. Separately, these objects can hardly be imagined into a complete, unified object of any value. But through creativity, the artist was able to imagine the objects into a unified object of artistic value. For the sculptural production of this artwork, it provides a sense that the artist went through scraps of found objects that he already has and reimagined them into a sculptural form intuitively and creatively rather than conceptually. The artworks do not provide a sense of deliberately looking for these particular found objects to place them together to create meaning or meaningful connections. The use of found objects here is more creative than conceptual. This kind of use of found objects puts into question the traditional use and description of art materials and sculptural materials. It shows that sculptural materials can be anything, even if solely for creative purposes. This kind of use of found objects can be traced to Picasso's The Bull's Head, assembled in 1942. The artwork is also regarded as one of the works that pioneered the use of found objects in sculpture. To create the artwork, the artist found a bicycle seat and handles in a pile of scraps, which he then creatively assembled together to create the bull's head. Found objects can be used in ways that allow possibilities of creating sculptures that mimic real-life objects through creative assembling of objects, and without the need to use traditional processes of molding and modeling and also traditional materials. In conclusion, by reviewing the works of these artists, found objects are extensively used and accepted in the current world of sculptural production today, seemingly with unlimited possibilities of how they can be used and the meanings they can provide. Found objects are used in different ways by artists, and each different way speaks to the artist's own creative genius, concerns, and explorations.